socialist economy that performed very well. But with privatization breaking up the cooperatives, farm output has plunged 40%, according to that biased communist publication, the Los Angeles Times. Now that's not stupid. That's not irrational or wasteful. That's the goal. The goal is to decapitalize Eastern industry and agriculture so it doesn't compete on the European market, to turn it into a colonized third world, a cheap labor, a cheap resource region. 1992, the Lithuanian government decreed that former owners and their descendants could reclaim land and other property confiscated during the socialist era. That meant that tens of thousands of farming families, about 70% of the rural population, has been evicted from land that they worked for over half a century, completely destroying the country's agricultural base in the process. In East Germany, much of the industrial and agricultural production was destroyed to prevent competition with heavily subsidized Western firms and farms. East Germans have a very interesting series of complaints that they're making now with unification. They complain that the net flow of money has been from the East to the West in what amounts to the colonization of the East. They complain that the free market is a myth, that the Western economy is fully regulated and rigged against the interests of the East. They complain that West German police are much more brutal than were the East German police. That if West Germany had denazified anywhere near as thoroughly as they're forcing the East to desocialize, they would have had a totally different country. A startling discovery made by citizens from communist countries is the amount of bureaucracy in the West. Soviet immigrants in Canada have complained that, quote, bureaucracy here was even worse than at home, according to an article by Hans Blumenfeld, Monthly Review. East Germans now under West German rule are staggered by the flood of complicated forms they have to fill out for taxes, health insurance, life insurance, unemployment compensation, job retraining, rent subsidies, bank accounts. Because of the kind of personal information they have to give, they feel less privacy than in the GDR, according to a report in Z Magazine. In Russia, organized crime now extorts tributes from 80% of all enterprises. Its tentacles reach right into the top echelons of government. Contract murders number in the thousands every year. Street crime has also sharply increased. In Hungary, there's been a 50% increase in murder since the fall of communism. According to the New York Times, the police force in Prague, in the Czech Republic, today is many times greater than it was under communism when relatively few police were needed. Now, isn't that interesting? Very few police in the communist police state. Figure that out. I don't get it. Is there something they're not telling me? There's been a drastic decline in cultural life. Theaters are now sparsely attended because tickets are so prohibitively expensive. Publicly owned movie industries in countries like Russia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, and the GDR that occasionally produced some worthwhile films are being defunded or bought out by Western interests, and they're now making cartoons, TV commercials, and music videos. Movie theaters in the Eastern countries are being taken over by Western chains, and they now offer many of the same Hollywood junk films that we have the freedom to see. Subsidies for the arts... Subsidies for the arts and literature have been severely cut. During the communist era, 3 out of every 5 books produced in the world were produced in the Soviet Union, including inexpensive but quality classics and classics and books by contemporary authors from Latin America and Africa and Asia, and poets from all over the world. Today, as the cost of books, periodicals, and newspapers have skyrocketed, today, as education has declined, readership has shrunk almost to third world levels. Books of a Marxist or otherwise critical left perspective have been removed from bookstores and libraries throughout almost all these countries. In East Germany, the Writers Association reported one instance in which 50,000 tons of books, some of them brand new, were buried in a dump after unification. The German officials can't quite get themselves to burn them like in the old days. Education is now accessible only to those who can afford the costly tuition. Curricula have been depoliticized, as they call it, meaning that a left perspective critical of imperialism and capitalism has been replaced by a conservative one. The same thing has happened in the news media. Both public and private media have been purged of leftists and restaffed by persons with acceptable ideological orientations, so that they're almost indistinguishable from our own media. This process of moving toward a pro-capitalist ideological monopoly has been described in the Western media as democratization and reform. There's also been a very sharp increase in gender inequality. The new Russian constitution eliminates provisions that guaranteed women the right to paid maternity leave, prenatal care, job security during pregnancy, affordable daycare centers, and all that. In all communist countries, about 90% of the women had jobs. Today, in the post-communist countries, women compose over 2/3 of the unemployed. Women are being driven from the professions in disproportionate numbers and are now advised against getting professional training. Prostitution is the one booming industry open to enterprising women in the free market, catering to foreign and domestic businessmen. Divorce, abortion, and birth control are more difficult to obtain. The financial and psychological independence that women used to enjoy under socialism is pretty much gone. You see how your own personal psychological independence is in part determined by social structures and social arrangements, what your options are, what your opportunities are, and all that. And that can be destroyed. In Russia, instances of sexual harassment and violence against women have increased sharply, as in the other countries. In Russia, the number of women murdered, primarily by husbands or boyfriends, has skyrocketed from 5,000 to 15,000 in the first 3 years of the free market paradise. For 50,000 a year. An additional 57,000 women were seriously injured in such assaults in 1994. These official figures, they understate the level of violence. The Communist Party committees that used to intervene in cases of domestic abuse no longer exist. Throughout Eastern Europe and Russia, many people now grudgingly, they're admitting that life was better under communism. I mean, that's even grudgingly being reported in the U.S. media. So it must be a lot of people saying this, if I keep hearing it so much, even in the U.S. media. There's a joke that circulated in Russia in 1992, after the first year of the free market paradise, and it went like this. Question: what did capitalism accomplish in 1 year that communism could not do in 70 years? Answer: make communism look good. Reacting to the pain of the free market, Eastern European voters have begun returning communists to power. In Russia too. Bringing them back into power to preside over the ruin and wreckage left by capitalist restoration. Socialism, the system that didn't work, provided everyone with some measure of security. Capitalism, the system that works, has brought a free-falling economy and mass misery. And I don't think, nor are these conditions just part of a temporary transition period. That's what we heard all the time. I remember Tom Brokaw, when he was in Russia, interviewing a guy and saying, well, before you can go up, you got to go down. This is some law of physics he just invented, There's a painful transition period that you can work through. In fact, nations can stay a long time in capitalist depression, with vast capital accumulation for the few and poverty for the many. Look at Latin America. And these communist nations, I think, like all so-called developing nations, are likely to remain in poverty indefinitely, so that a privileged few can continue to enjoy unlimited opulence. Well, the people of these eastern countries wanted to be like America, at least a lot of them did, not knowing what America was like. And instead they ended up being more like the capitalist third world, the same direction that capitalist America is being pushed into. They've suffered, by the way, a momentous historical defeat. And the third world struggles have suffered a tremendous defeat because they can no longer get aid from East Germany or Soviet Union. And what do we learn